Thank you for joining Heritage Calgary for today's Heritage Matters Demystifying event. My name is Josh Treptow and I'm the CEO of Heritage Calgary. I'd like to thank the Inglewood Community Association for partnering with us today to host this event at their community hall. They have some original blueprints over there by the kitchen. We understand it's probably a very crowd-specific item, so this crowd probably would appreciate that. Heritage Calgary is a charitable civic partner of the City of Calgary, focused on the research, education, and preservation of our shared heritage in Calgary. We believe heritage is a dynamic process by which identity is experienced, interpreted, and represented, and take pride in working with Calgarians to honor the fabric that we are all part of. We'd also like to take this opportunity to acknowledge that we are gathered on the ancestral homelands of the people of the Treaty 7 region of southern Alberta, which includes the Blackfoot Confederacy comprising of the Siksika, Piikani, and Kainai First Nations, as well as the Tsuut'ina First Nation and the Stoney Nakoda, including the Chiniki, Bearspaw, and Wesley First Nation. This territory is also home to the Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 3, within the historical Northwest Métis homeland. We are grateful to work, live, and learn on the land adjacent to where the Bow River meets the Elbow River, the traditional Blackfoot name for which is Mohkinstsis, which we now call the City of Calgary. Heritage Calgary acknowledges the history of this land and the role colonization has played in the lives of Indigenous people today, and that every day is an opportunity to engage in and work towards demonstrating leadership on reconciliation. We have 4 amazing speakers that will be helping us demystify heritage. Actually, I guess we have 3. We have Cynthia Klaassen, who will be up first talking about the inventory. Cynthia is the Heritage Resources Program Manager for Heritage Calgary and manages the inventory of evaluated historic resources, which lists over 900 sites of historical significance in Calgary. She is a heritage and museum professional. She has previously worked at the National Music Centre in Fort Calgary. Cynthia is a member of the Sam Centre Community Advisory Group for the Calgary Stampede and serves on the board of directors for the Alexandra Centre Society. She is a past president of the Calgary Heritage Initiative Society and a founding president of Doors Open Calgary. In recognition of her community work in 2012, she was awarded the Governor General's Award for History as co-chair of the Century Homes Calgary project, and in 2004 received a Lion Award from the then Calgary Heritage Authority. As a champion of brutalist architecture, she has hosted numerous sold-out brutal tours. Cynthia holds a Bachelor of Music degree from McMaster University and a Master of Arts degree in the history of art from the University of Toronto. In her spare time, she volunteers her voice to the Calgary Philharmonic Orchestra Choir and indulges in her obsession with Lego, her words. Simon Cheng is a heritage planner from the City of Calgary with a master's degree in planning. Inspired by his global travels and influenced by his time living in London, where he was immersed in architectural marvels. Simon is passionate about crafting vibrant, sustainable urban spaces that celebrate heritage as an integral part of the urban tapestry. And then finally, we'll have a fireside discussion with Jean Rawling, who recently had her home designation. And before that, we'll take a quick break before the panel to just move some stuff around. Everyone can refill their coffee, and then we'll continue. Cynthia, over to you.
So welcome everybody this morning. Just as a reminder, we are also videotaping this session because we want to be able to share it with other communities who also have an interest in the inventory and designation and what does it all mean. So this morning we're going to attempt to demystify some of that for you. Demystifying heritage, the inventory, that's what I'm going to speak about specifically. The inventory is what the portion of this whole process that's managed by Heritage Calgary. But I just wanted to emphasize that we are a civic partner, so we are not the City of Calgary, but we work very closely with the city. And we are a civic partner, so we're funded by the city, and that's where we get the funding as well to do the research that we do on a lot of the properties that we look at. And just to review, our mission and mandate is really to embrace and keep stories of Calgary, to advise council on matters relating to heritage and evaluating potential historic resources. I also do a lot of work on plaques and commemoration for sites across the city. And we're always looking for ways to promote Calgary's heritage resources, whether it's through talks like this or through walks that we do in the summer associated with Historic Calgary Week, Jane's Walk, and et cetera, et cetera. So make sure you keep an eye on our website for more information about future events. I did want to take some time to introduce the team. We're actually a team of 6, and most of us are here today. So you've already met Josh, and you've actually already met Jody, our assistant, who checked you in. Shannon is also here, Shannon McLaughlin. She's our communication specialist. And Afra Reyes, where's Afra? Afra's sitting over there. And Afra helps out with the inventory piece, and she worked at the city, so her knowledge of planning practices has been invaluable for Heritage Calgary this year. I wanted to start the discussion by just having you think about what your favorite building or historic site is in Calgary. And I've got pictures of a number of residences that we've recently added to the inventory. You'll notice that a lot of these are actually fairly modest sites, not necessarily big flashy mansions, that kind of thing. It's not all Lockheed House. So some of these residences are located in Hillhurst, in Inglewood, Mission. The image you see down in the bottom left is actually the Home Ranch House. That's in Southwood. So the Southwood community was built up around that, and we added that to the inventory just last year. So a lot of these sites you'll be able to find on the inventory. So anybody want to just share what their favorite heritage resource is? No? Everyone's too shy. So now what I'm going to do this morning is really spend some time talking about the inventory. And the items listed on the inventory, we actually have over 900 items and sites listed on the inventory. They could be residences. It's also landscape. So the City of Calgary's Parks Department, they have a lot of sites listed on the inventory as well. They may be commercial buildings. They could be infrastructure. So there are also a lot of bridges included on the inventory, as well as public buildings like the Calgary Public Building. So lots of different types. Heritage can also be intangible, but we're not going to get into that today. We don't have any intangible assets currently listed on the inventory. An intangible asset could be something like the Calgary Stampede, which is an annual celebration. It can also be food, for example, the Caesar drink that was invented in Calgary. Those are some examples of intangible assets. And then I'll just briefly go through the benefits of heritage, although I think most people in this room are maybe aware of some of that. But the City of Calgary has a 3-pillar resilience strategy: economic, social, and environmental. And heritage can also actually offer benefits to all 3 of these categories. So for example, economically, rehabilitation projects, and I'm thinking specifically about the big job that recently was unveiled at the City Hall, which creates a lot more jobs, creates trades that are specialized trades, and generally when you're renovating a heritage property, more money will be spent paying for those specialized trades than actually on the materials. So there's a higher proportion of construction costs for labor rather than new build projects. And also, there's been some studies that the city's recently done and have shown that heritage characteristics add an average of $36.60 per square foot when compared to similar non-heritage properties. And there's also a concept called the heritage halo. So when sites are located in a heritage area, it often lifts the value of the adjacent properties, even though they may not be heritage properties. Tourism is also a big driver, and of course, I don't know about you, but when I have guests coming to Calgary, I will often take them to Inglewood, the Silk Road specifically. And so having these sites is also attractive for tourism, and it's also attractive for actually film. And we've seen a lot of filming happening in Calgary recently because of that too. And then there's social well-being, giving us a sense of place. And I think when it comes to residential heritage, that is key. I talk to a lot of people in heritage communities, and making sure that people understand the reason they live there is because of the character of that neighborhood is really, really important to them. So those are some of the social benefits. And then there are actually also environmental benefits. And here Well, the slide on the right, I wanted to show you, those buildings aren't on the inventory, but they're located in Marda Loop. And the building with the now open sign was actually built as a sixplex, and it's been converted into retail commercial property. So heritage assets, we can also adapt them to new uses and changes of uses. And that's a much better way, I think, of dealing with and helping the environment rather than just tearing everything down and building something brand new. Heritage buildings have high levels of embodied energy, and from pre-industrial periods, sometimes a lot of the materials is actually of a better quality than some of the materials you're going to get in new buildings. We also want to make sure that buildings today don't end up being garbage for tomorrow. And we're seeing some office conversions happening in the downtown core. So for example, the Petrofina building is being currently adapted from offices into residential. So you can get, sometimes you get residential to commercial, but the opposite can happen. So really encouraging that adaptive reuse, which I think creates a lot more vibrant, interesting city. Next, I am going to focus now on speaking specifically about the inventory and what the inventory is. So the inventory is a list of sites that have been researched and evaluated following provincial standards and guidelines that have been approved by City Council. And these are sites that are recognized as having heritage value. So for property owners interested in designating their property, the first step is actually to call Heritage Calgary or check out the inventory and make sure the site is listed on the inventory. And what Heritage Calgary does is we currently assess all of the site requests, so we always do a site visit. And then if a site meets the requirements, the value requirements, we will hire a professional researcher to do the research on that property. The researcher completes an evaluation form, which is approved by the board, and then that property is listed. This is a map showing all of the heritage, or actually it's focused on some of the heritage resources in Calgary. As I mentioned, there are over 900 of them. And you can find this, it's an interactive map. You can find it on the Heritage Calgary website. It's easy to search by address, or you can also search by community and see what other resources are in your community, by architectural style, if you're interested in that. And then you can also search on here for sites that have actually been demolished. So even when a site is demolished, we still keep it listed on the inventory because it is deemed to have had heritage value to the City of Calgary. And we also find this site, because it's available online, it's available internationally. So anything that we choose to list here in Calgary is available for anybody to look at in the world. And we recently had a call actually from an architect or someone who was writing a book in Denmark that had found some examples of Danish architecture here in Calgary. So we're able to get them a little bit more information for a book that they were writing. So now I'm just going to talk about the process of listing a site on the inventory. The first two steps would be to identify potential resources, and properties are identified by property owners. We receive a lot of requests now from property owners. This is something new. It never used to occur. We had about 60 requests so far this year from property owners. We work closely with our heritage planning partners at the city. They will often also identify sites that should be listed on the inventory. And then we get information from the general community. So if there's any site you are interested in and you notice it's not listed on the inventory, then please let us know, because we actually have a database of all the properties that could be potential sites for the inventory. The next step, of course, is to assess those properties to see if they would meet the requirements. And that's where the site visit comes into play. We also look at previous studies of that neighborhood that might have occurred. There are historic context papers, and they will frequently identify places of historic interest. So we'll look to see if it's listed on there. There's also been a windshield survey. Some of you might have heard of the windshield survey that identified heritage assets in some of the core areas in the city. So we'll also look to see if it was identified there. That's the assessment side of things. I wanted to talk more about assessment, just so that everybody understands what we're looking for when we're assessing a site. So a site has to have value in one or more of these criteria. This is the first thing that we look at when we're assessing a site. So first of all, activity. A site has to be directly associated with an activity that made a significant contribution to the broad pattern of municipal history. In this case, I'm showing a picture of Riley Lodge. The next, it could be an event. So an event could include planned or unplanned gatherings of people that mark local watershed events, recognition of a particular event, or the celebration of an activity or cultural practice. And what I'm showing here, it's a house, yes, it's the Van Wart residence, which is where the first service of the East Calgary Presbyterian Church took place. Next, institution. And institutions are organizations founded for educational, religious, charitable, leisure, or social purposes. And here I'm showing the Lockheed House, which was actually the home of the Red Cross for many, many years. So it has institutional value in that way. And then we also look at person-people value. In this case, a resource associated with someone that might have lived there at some time. And this is the Violet King residence, which you can find in Sunnyside. So Violet King was the first female Black lawyer called to the bar in Alberta. So that's why that house is important. And then we look at style value. There might be some important stylistic contributions that a site has made here. In this case, it's the Bloom residence, which is located in Southwest Calgary and is it looks like a James Bond villain headquarters, yes, but it's also a great example of the expressionist style of architecture. Design value is another value that we look at. Does a site exhibit contrived intent or a plan in the arrangement of function and artistic elements? In this case, I'm showing the Danoon residence, which is a log style residence, which we see sometimes in Calgary too. And then construction. Was there a unique construction or an innovative construction practice that was used in the particular building? In this case, the Rideau Towers had a mid-century slab type of construction, which was unique to Calgary at that point in time. And then finally, symbolic value. And here I've included an image of the Enoch Sales residence, which was unfortunately burned down in 2007. So just some example, when you're nominating a property, Alexandra Terrace, that was the last one. When you're nominating a property, just keeping in mind that we'll be looking for at least one of these values in that particular property. The next step is to do the contract and research. I will say when we're assessing, we also meet with our heritage planning partners just so that we agree on, we're both agreed because we both actually review the evaluation form. So it's important that the heritage planning team is involved in the whole process. And then we contract and research a professional researcher. It usually takes them 2 or 3 months to do the research and then to complete the evaluation form. They will do site visits, they will provide photo documentation, and do a lot of archival research at the City of Calgary archives, at the National Archives, at the Provincial Archives. So that's kind of the information they're looking for. And then the information is validated by Heritage Calgary and the Heritage Planning Partners. We review the work, make sure it's accurate and up to date. What we're looking for too is factual information. So not just like, oh, so-and-so said, the Duke of Wellington slept here one night, so it has person-people value. Well, what we're looking for is there anything to prove that actually did happen? Or is it just hearsay? So that's the kind of validation we do there. We also follow these national standards and guidelines for how the information is to be written. So we do some editing along the way there. And then there's the approval process. All of the sites for listing on the inventory are presented to the Heritage Calgary Board for approval, and the board meets 4 times a year. And in most cases, they do approve everything. So we're hoping that our assessment and vetting process means that everything's good to go. And then finally, the resources added to the inventory. So that's the last step in the inventory. And then the slide you see in the middle actually represents all the sites listed on the inventory. Now, the next step is designation. And I'm just going to do a really quick intro to that because Simon's going to take over the conversation on that side. So after acceptance on the inventory, if the site has enough integrity to qualify, the next step towards protection is designation as a municipal historic resource. Designation is permitted through provincial legislation. And then what happens is the property owners will work directly with the city's heritage planning department. Now, between the time a site is listed, if a lot of time has elapsed between the listing and the designation request, there actually may be some need for a reevaluation, because what we want to do is make sure that everything that we could be regulated as a designated site is still in place. So Heritage Calgary from time to time will also do reevaluations of historic properties. Currently, there are some sites listed on the inventory that were listed back in 1982 and haven't had any research done in the interim. So those for sure are sites that we're going to want to do some more research on. So not all sites listed on the inventory are eligible for designation, and some may have already been demolished, as I pointed out before. Yeah, and currently we've got, I think, 153 resources that are designated. Those also include some parks and recreation centers. So just to summarize, only resources listed on the inventory are eligible for designation, and Heritage Calgary manages the inventory. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you. I'm going to hand things over to Simon now to continue the conversation and lead you through the designation process.
My name is Simon Cheng, and I am a heritage planner with the City of Calgary. My specialty of work is working on municipal historic resource designations. We are a team of 6. I think a lot of you might be familiar with Aaron and Alistair, who've been with the team for quite a while now. Kim Haskell and I have worked for several years in heritage planning, and we also have some new faces, Pamela Haskell and Amy Stevens, who are in the audience today. We are situated in a group called City Planning Policy, and from time to time we also draw resources from the greater team to just help out with some heritage initiatives. Thank you everyone for coming to the Demystifying designation presentation today. The first myth that I want to bust is that the path for every heritage property owner must be linear. If your property is listed on the inventory, you must be designated. You're eligible for designation, but you don't have to always designate. If we think about a heritage from a more holistic sense, heritage falls into 3 categories: identify, protect, and manage. Not one is better than the other. And the paths are not so absolute. When thinking this way, we begin to have a conversation with owners to discuss their goals and desires, so that we can come to a better understanding of how we can help the property owners best retain their heritage homes. But the topic of today is designation, so that's what we'll focus on. So what is designation? There are 3 types of designation: municipal, provincial, and federal. Municipal historic resource designation protects a historic building from demolition or unsympathetic alteration to the physical aspects of a building that best conveys its historic value. And Municipal Historic Resource Designation Bylaw outlines what is protected. Provincial designation offers protection as well. And federal designation is more honorific, and it doesn't offer the legal protection. So then the question is, how do I begin? And Cynthia already mentioned, being listed on the inventory is the first step. The second step is just to have a conversation with us. We have listed our email address on this slide here. But this is a very important step, because designation is a very important long-term commitment. Designation has to make sense for both the owner and also has to make sense for the city as well. And we want to make sure that we're all doing it for the right reasons. So during the conversation, we'll have a discussion about what your goals are, what you can expect from designation, and also the tools and incentives that are available to you. And we want to be able to provide you with all that information so that you, the property owner, can make an informed decision. in the next step, we're still trying to get to know you, but we also want to get to know the property a bit more. So what we do is we analyze the evaluation statement of significance and integrity. If your site is listed on the inventory, you would have research done on your property. We're going to analyze that in a bit more detail. And that helps us to really understand the home's evolution over time. What we'll also do is we'll also conduct a site visit and update our photo inventory with more modern photos. And when we determine that the inventory sites have sufficient historic integrity, we determine that they're eligible for designation. And if you're eligible, the owner will send a formal letter to the city to request designation. So the next part is where the meat of the crux of the designation comes. So write and review the bylaw. So the city works with the homeowner to determine what will be designated. We typically focus on the exterior portions of the home. Some historic interior features can be designated, but that's really on a case-by-case basis. And so you might be wondering why our designations are focused like this. We want to pretty much adopt a minimal intervention approach, protecting only as much as necessary to conserve the physical aspect of a building that best conveys that historic value of the property. So what that does is it offers the balance between public and private interest. Members of the public that are walking by can really see the house and go, yeah, you know what, this is a really cool heritage property. But it also offers the balance for private property owners to be able to continue to enjoy living in their private spaces while making changes to allow the living space to be more adaptable and usable. The final step has more to do with legislative and regulatory processes. We issue a notice of intent, minimum 60 days in advance of council approval. And that is a legislative process required by the Historic Resources Act. The proposed municipal historic resource designation bylaw is presented to committee and council for approval. And then once approved, the city registers the bylaw onto your land title. Back to the city's heritage conservation approach. The decision on what any owner can do with their property can really fall anywhere into these three themes. The tools and incentives are applicable to a variety of heritage resources. Some are available to inventory sites, and some are only available to designated properties. Tools and incentives are a little bit too broad too difficult to discuss in broad terms because what's available for a specific property is really dependent on the situation and context. For example, we have to really understand what your property type is, what land use district it falls under, what your community's local area plan is, and what your lot size is. And so I'll offer a caveat, is that when we discuss the incentives and tools that are available to you, be aware that they are not available to every property. So with that caveat in mind, some of the incentives that have been offered to heritage property include land use relaxation to allow secondary suites, home-based businesses, parking relaxations. These planning incentives and best practice advice are offered to most inventory sites. Legal protection through municipal historic resource designation, on the other hand, offers financial incentives such as conservation grants and other different forms of planning incentives such as heritage density transfer. More information can be found on our website, so you can just browse into that circle there and you'll be able to find it. I want to present two prevailing myths that I've heard over the years and discuss these with you. So the first myth is only high style and prominent buildings are designation worthy. True or false? And Cynthia's already mentioned that. So the answer is false. The reality is Calgary's architecture is quite diverse. Many buildings in Calgary are a showcase of a mix of modest interpretation and eclectic adaptations of architectural styles. And that really adds a unique charm to the city. Inventory sites that have sufficient historical integrity can be designated. The other myth is designated properties cannot be altered in any way. The answer is also false. The photo that you see here is the Grant Jones residence. The property was designated a few years ago. So here you'll see the side and rear profile of the house. And the red box is where the addition was proposed. And in the bylaw, we decided not to regulate the back of the house. And this is the proposed addition. And so you can see here that it doesn't really substantially alter the character defining element, and it's subordinate to the main house itself. It's also contemporary in design to contrast against the historic home so that it's really distinguishable from the addition. Anyway, that concludes the informational part of my presentation. I have listed our email address here. There are probably going to be some specific questions about your properties that you might have. If you have them, please send it to cityheritage@calgary.ca, and we'll try to answer your questions as best we can. So yeah, without further ado, we'd like to move on to the next segment here. And Cynthia and I wanted to have a conversation with Jean Rawling. She's the part owner of the Calfleece residence. And the Calfleece residence will be presented to council on Tuesday for municipal historic resource designation. So Calfleece residence is an example of a modern architectural style adapted to Calgary's local geography and climate. It's located in St. Andrews Heights on a bluff overlooking the Bow River Valley. It contains all the hallmarks of a modern design: curtain wall glazing with clear-story windows on the second story, 2 full-width balconies, varying degrees of recessed walls, overhanging eaves with curved roofs, transitioning to a flat roof at the rear, heavily articulated planes expressed through tapered concrete sidewalls, and it really has a neutral palette of colors punched up with playful details with the geometric glass side lights at the back of the house and front entryway. So Jean is a relative newcomer to the heritage conservation world. I first spoke with Jean last year in July and found her to be a very compelling individual. Something about the conversation really left an impression on me. She said to me, "I don't consider myself to be an owner of this property. I consider myself to be a steward." And I left that conversation with enthusiasm to help Jean designate her home. But I didn't hear from her again until a year later. And this year, she told us to move forward with a designation. So Cynthia and I wanted to have a conversation with Jean to ask her to reflect on that year. So Jean, if you'd like to come up, we'd like to get started. So the first question I have for you is, can you tell us the story about acquiring your house?
So we lived in St. Andrews Heights for 10 years before we moved into the Calfleece residence. And we would walk along Toronto Crescent, which is a lovely place to walk along, and there's a dog park right below. And every time we walked down the Toronto Crescent, I would say to my husband, if we were ever going to live on the Crescent, this would be the only house I would want to occupy. And much to my chagrin, Mark put a letter in the mailbox with our names and our phone numbers saying, if you ever wanted to sell your house, please consider us. And I thought, this is so embarrassing. We have our information in the hands of a complete stranger. But as luck would have it, we received a call in early 2019 saying in 10 days our house is going to be on the market. You put a letter in the mailbox. Would you be interested in seeing the house before it went on sale? You are one of 5 people who have put letters in the mailbox. So we felt like we had to jump. So we, 2 days later, had time to actually walk through. And opening that door in the middle of winter to this airy, amazing piece of architecture was really stunning. We had been entranced by the location, which is on a corner, and it's quiet. It's not, well, for those of you who know the area, the hospital is on one end of St. Andrews Heights, Crowchild Trail is on the other, and this house is right in the middle, so you don't have the noise from either of those places. uses. So, so we fell in love with it. I don't know what else I can say. I guess the rest is history.
Thanks for that, Jean. I'm wondering, when you found out that the house was listed on the inventory, what was your reaction to that? How did you feel about that?
It actually invoked terror because I felt like we did not know anything about architecture. We didn't know anything about the mid-century modern ethos, and we didn't know how we would be able to contribute to the conservation of this property. So it was really daunting, but we also knew that it hadn't been designated, and so we felt a sigh of relief because we thought, if we aren't unable to manage this, we aren't going to be held up by the toenails and beaten with a carrot by the city of Calgary because we don't have that responsibility yet. So we were excited but terrified.
So the previous owner provided you with blueprints, and I can actually pull it up on the screen in a bit, but I was wondering if you can tell us a bit about, I guess, receiving those blueprints and how that compelled you to move forward with some of your decisions to, first of all, designate or even, renovate your home.
Sure. So we actually had the owners over to dinner so that they could tell us the stories associated with the house, and that's when they presented us with the blueprints. And it was very exciting to us because we had gone through renos in our previous house, and we knew how valuable having that, having those blueprints were for planning interior renos. We also secondarily began to appreciate how much thought and planning had gone into design of this beautiful building. And so we were able to appreciate more what the architect's original intent was. There were notes about materials that the architect had wanted to use, and those aren't present anymore, whether they were never used or whether they had been ripped out by the previous owners. It was still very interesting to know what the original vision was. So I guess the other thing that really intrigued us was that sort of in a prelude to geothermal, because of the drawings, we could appreciate the intricate ductwork that is in the foundation that contributes to temperature modulation in the house, whether it's winter or summer. And so that was kind of an added bonus to us.
Yeah, that's a really interesting feature too, yeah. I think, Simon, I'm gonna hand it over to you, but I have one quick question. And I should know the answer to this, but do we know who the architect was?
We do indeed. So here I can wax poetic. So John Handima was the architect. He was working with the Calgary School Board. Mr. Kalfleisch was an individual who was drafted into World War II, and he was always wanted to be an architect, but when he came back, he had to put food on the table and wasn't able to realize his dream of becoming an architect. But he was, if I remember correctly, the supervisor of school, high up in the Calgary School Board. He bought the property and in 1963, and then spent 4 years thinking about how to integrate the construction and the property with natural with the elements as well as the landscape. And so he worked with John Handima to actually build this.
So we had a conversation about designation in 2022, July, and I didn't hear from you for a year. Did you have any hesitation between then and now, and the time you called me this year? And you know, if so, can you walk us through kind of your thought process of weighing the pros and cons of designation?
I have to admit, there was absolutely no hesitation. It was all about competing priorities. And so Simon and I had liaised by email, and then Mark and I had discussed everything, and then I had forwarded the email for signature to Mark, and then it sat in his email for about a year. And so that's the only reason we didn't designate previously.
I'm just wondering then, why did you choose to designate in the first place? Like what prompted that decision?
As I alluded to previously, it was the terror of not having help to actually conserve this place. We felt like if it had been designated by the city, it was clearly something of note, and we wanted all the help we could get as far as expertise in knowing how to preserve this and how to make sure we weren't stepping on things that were crucial to the design elements.
Okay. Thanks very much for that. So you feel like this great weight of responsibility for this house. I can totally get it. Can you tell us, I guess, what some of your, I guess, steps moving forward are in terms of helping, preserve this house? You had also mentioned you were interested in energy conservation. How did that factor in?
So when a stiff wind blows from the west, we get a really refreshing breeze through the light fixtures and the switches. So that is one thing that we put, I don't know if this is actually a term, but outsolation on our previous house to really improve the energy efficiency. And we thought that would be an excellent addition to our house, but we want to do that in conjunction with expertise so that we don't destroy the exterior. The other thing we are really keen to do is put solar panels on the roof. And that was actually something that we were worried would not be allowed with designation, but we understand that because those panels are temporary structures, they won't destroy the integrity of the building itself. So we're really excited to be able to do that.
Did anything occur during that designation process that did make you reconsider your decision to move forward with it? Is there anything scary about the process?
We have a realtor who lives next door to us, and when we mentioned that we were going to go through with this, he said, well, why would you do that? And that was after we had already had numerous people walking up and down in front of our house and stopping to look at it, saying how much they had always admired this. So I guess the one potential thing that might have stood in our way was whether this would affect resale. And we felt that there was no way that that destroying this house and rebuilding in a very sort of matter-of-fact way would ever be more valuable than actually the resource that we have. So it was never, we were never worried.
Thanks so much. And, there's always, a lot of benefits to having designation, being able to offer, being able to access some grants, funding incentive that we mentioned, is definitely really helpful, adds a lot of value to homes. Okay. So I guess the question I have for you is, what's your experience been like with the designation process?
Perhaps I haven't paid attention enough to it, but I have found it really, really straightforward. I have to mention, I mentioned to Simon before the talk that we understood that the property was on the inventory, and we reached out to the generic email address, and straight away Simon got back to us in a very timely and professional manner, and what made all the information available that we could have wanted. And then, when he didn't hear from us for a year, he just sat back and didn't add pressure at all. And so, subsequently after we've signed the documentation, everything has been very seamless, and we've had to do really nothing at all. So it's been very, it's not been a job at all.
Thanks. I know you mentioned your neighbor was a real estate agent. I was also wondering, has your move to designation inspired any of your other neighbors to look at this option?
I don't, so we haven't actually advertised it. And a lot of the buildings on our street in particular are all new builds. So I'm not sure that it would necessarily be of note to them. Yeah.
Do you have any more questions?
I was just wondering if Jean had anything else you wanted to share with us.
Is there anything else you'd like to share with us?
Yeah, any questions we haven't asked?
I will just say that it's, I'm just very excited about this whole endeavor, and I'm really keen to move forward as much as our full-time jobs will allow.
Do you want to end off with the question?
Yeah, one more question.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what's the most important piece of advice you would offer to someone who wants to designate their home?
I would check out the inventory, see what's written about your house, and think about how you would want to be a custodian.
Okay. Do you have a question about that?
We did, but yeah, I think that's good. Anything else, Simon? Did you have another question?
I'm sorry? Can we look at the photos? Absolutely. So.
Yeah.
So the question was if we could look at the photos and.
Yeah, Simon's going to go and show us more of the photos of the house too, including some of those blueprints.
What is the age?
So the question is, what is the age of this house and when it was built? And if it is the sort of one of the youngest houses on the inventory.
1967.
So the date of this house is 1967.
So Daryl asks, says that a lot of these houses of this era are experimented a lot with materials. And have you had any building inspection done? And what was the result of those inspections?
We actually did have inspection prior to purchase, and the integrity is reasonable. There was no, that, as I understand, the ductwork in the concrete down below was sort of innovative for the time, and we haven't had any issues with that at all. We had briefly flirted with the idea of doing a massive interior restructuring, but it was actually because of that ductwork that we realized, nope, we're really not gonna touch any major components of the construction. We're gonna leave it as is, and it's working just fine.
So I think further to the previous question, the question was, is this I would say the youngest residence on the inventory to be designated? And it appears that is the case, but we'll just have to confirm that. Okay. I think we've sort of done an organic move into the Q&A section of the talk, which is great. So were there any other questions that anyone had, either from myself, Simon, or Jean?
Excellent question, and yes, so we're really trying. We did do some interior renos, and we have, and this is thanks to my husband Mark, who is almost obsessive with record keeping. But we've got pictures and drawings of all the changes that we made, so that people are aware for future posterity.
If you don't mind me asking, what interior renovations have you made?
We did strip you'll have noticed that there was shag carpet everywhere, and we did take that all out. And we put hardwood floor, it was an interesting process to select the floor that was not going to compete with the ceiling, which seemed to be more difficult than I would have expected, but I'm so not an interior designer. And so we also took out the hot tub that was on a pedestal in the master bedroom. Kind of an homage to the 70s. But, so we did a few things like that. But really, the previous owners had done a kitchen reno in 2008, so we sort of maintained that for now.
Any other questions? Anything from Heritage Calgary? No. I think, I'm going to hand things over to Josh to wrap things up, but thank you for your attention this morning, and thank you, Jean, for sharing your story.
Thank you for listening.
Yeah.
Well, thanks so much, Cynthia, Jean, and Simon, for that. It's always fascinating and wonderful to hear property owners like yourselves who value their heritage so much. Thanks to everyone again for attending today. Please watch for our post-event survey. We'd love to get your feedback on today's events. And we're going to have an upcoming event on November 7th at the Marteloo Community Association, where we will be unveiling the new Marteloo historical context papers. So that'll be an exciting event. If you would like to see more events like this, please consider donating to Heritage Calgary to support us. We have a QR code available in front of the room, or you can visit our website, heritagecalgary.ca, to donate. Thanks very much for everyone for joining us today. We'll look forward to seeing you at our next event in November. Thank you.